How's that? Yeah, look at that. You know, they told me this morning, we were talking about the table and stool, that I needed to sit down at the table because otherwise I will walk across the stage up here and they'll have to follow me with the camera. And just because I have the opportunity this morning to pick on Tracy, you know, I'm going to. Tracy and I have a great working relationship, and so we can pick on each other a little bit, right? Mike was like, well, when Tracy preaches, if we don't, keep him in one place, we have to put the camera on fast speed to keep up with him as he moves across the stage. And so I'm going to try and make it easy for them this morning and just sit here and see how that goes. Now, I don't know how long I'll be able to do it, but we'll try. If you are here with us this morning and you're a guest, or maybe you haven't been with us here at Five Rivers Church in a while, this is a great week to be here because we're starting a brand new series called Our Place, What's Next? Now, one of the things we love to give you the opportunity to do is follow along with us in YouVersion. Now, YouVersion is an app that Life Church created that allows churches to create opportunities for people to see scripture and sermon notes and all those things. And so if you're an app user for Five Rivers Church, take your app out, hop on the homepage, click on the Our Place banner right on the homepage. It'll take you right to the YouVersion app if you have it installed on your phone. If not, it'll take you to a web page and you'll see all of our notes there. One thing that, again, I want to pick on Tracy a little bit about, there's a screen right up here. If you don't have the church app and you want to follow along, you can take a picture with your phone of that code right there, and it'll magically take you right where you need to go. That's pretty cool, right? Now, if you have the YouVersion app open right now and you're looking at the notes, you can contrast the notes this week with the notes for the past couple of weeks because Tracy and I have a different philosophy in how we use YouVersion. Tracy pretty much scripts his sermon in YouVersion events and lists it all for you, right? I mean, you can pretty much read Tracy's whole sermon in YouVersion events because he lists it all. All 62 pages, right, Tracy, right? And then my notes are there's just a little bit in there. And I say all that because Tracy tends to say things up here when he's preaching, and I always tell him, Tracy, don't do that. And he's like, no, but it's fun. I like to do it. And I'm like, well, I like to do it too. So we pick at each other a little bit. This is all in good humor. But I do want to say something on a serious note, really. Okay, I've picked on Tracy enough. Now I want to give him some props this morning. This new series that we're beginning is like a continuation of what we started talking about at the beginning of the year when we talked about our family. Now, Tracy is the team lead for the speaking team here at Five Rivers Church, which means he's responsible for making sure that those of us who are going to speak have something to talk about, right? To make sure that we know what we're going to talk about, that the communications team has the information they need to create graphical elements like these and update websites and all kinds of stuff that has to happen behind the scenes. And Tracy's the guy who does that. And I want to make sure that I let you know that I want to brag on Tracy a little bit about the flow and the skeletal structure of what we have done so far this year. We started talking about a church family, right? Because we're a brand new church that's a merger of two churches, Kettering Church and Discover Point Church. But we're one new family as Five Rivers, and we talked about that for a whole month in January. We talked about what it means to be a family. In February, we switched gears a little bit, and we started talking about how important it is that everybody in the family knows they have a part to play in the family, right? Doing my part. And so we talked about the importance of recognizing that you have a gift and that you should be using that gift and doing your part, because if we don't all do our part, the family isn't as effective as it could be in living, loving, and leading like Jesus. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the house that the family lives in. So this month, we're going to be talking about the house that we live in. It's called Our Place, What's Next? And in this series, we're going to talk about what it takes for Five Rivers Church to make our house as usable as it can be, as effective and functional as it can be for relational ministry. And what I want you to do as I start this morning is I want you to consider something. Those of you who are part of a family, especially if you are married and have a family, I want you to consider what it was like when you were looking for your first place to live. whether that was an apartment or you were buying a house or whatever it was, I want you to stop and think about what were some of the things you considered when you looked for your first place to live. Or maybe you're in the process right now of looking for a different place to live. And I want you to think about all the things you take into account when you're trying to make the decision about which house will work best for you. Now, can you all relate to what I'm asking you to do? Right? Okay? So let's think a little bit about how your family would consider a home that you're going to purchase or a place you're going to rent or live or whatever it is. Each family has a different set of needs and wants, yes? Some families have lots of children. Some families have no children. Some families have lots of animals, right? Some families don't have any animals. Some families want lots of land, and some people would rather live downtown in an apartment complex or something like that. Everybody has a different set of needs and wants, right? And those needs and wants will impact the decisions you make on where you will choose to live and whether or not a home or a house will function for you. So while each family has a different set of needs, each family has a different set of wants. One thing is constant in all of them, and that is this. They will make their decision where they're going to live based on whether or not the house will work for their needs, yes? Some of you love to entertain, and so you might look for a different set of needs in your home than people who really don't care about entertaining a lot. So there are things that you will consider when you're looking for a home and whether or not that home will function for you. Because just because it's the cheapest, right, doesn't mean it works for you, true? Just because it's in the right location doesn't necessarily mean it works for you, right? There could be the perfect house in the perfect location, everything's great, except it doesn't have one of the big things that you need to make sure it'll function for your family. So you have to take into account all kinds of considerations, all kinds of questions have to be answered as you make that decision. Here's what I want you to know today. Five Rivers Church, we are now in a place where we are looking at all of those types of questions as we begin to consider how do we make this house work for our needs as a church family. Because here's something that's really interesting. Sometimes a family will have a housing issue where, let's say, two people get married and one of them already owns a home, right? Maybe they've been married before, maybe a spouse died, maybe they were divorced, who knows what happened, but one of them already owns a home. And they're looking at, well, how can we make this house work for our new family? Y'all, can anybody relate to this? Have any of you experienced any of this? My in-laws, when they got married, my father-in-law already owned a home. And so they were having, my mother-in-law also owned a home. And so they had to look at, well, which of these two places would be better for us? And so they had to make all these considerations. And here's the thing about that. That can be really hard, right? Because there's a whole new set of things to consider, because just because the house worked for one of the people who lived there doesn't mean it'll work for the new family that's going to be living there, right? Or it won't work in its current form. There may need to be some changes made to the house to make it work for the new family. And so that is where we are at Five Rivers Church right now, right? You all know the story. To those of you who have either been with Discover Point Church or Kettering Church, maybe you're brand new to just Five Rivers Church. We're a church merge, and one of our church families owned the house that we now live in to do church. And so we have some considerations that we need to take into account to figure out how to make this house work for the new family. Now, can this be hard? Yeah? Can it be hard, especially for the people who lived in the house before? Yeah, because why? Well, they have a lot of history, and there's a lot of stuff that's attached to that, right? They feel sometimes like, well, this is my house, right? And the other part of the family might feel like, well, this isn't really my house. I'm just, here. We don't want any of that here at Five Rivers Church, because this is our house. And in order for us to really get off on the right foot here, I think one of the things that's super important is to understand the history of how this all came to be. And I'm talking about this house. I'm talking about the history of this house. And so what I want to do for just a few minutes this morning, because is history important, folks? Why is history important? History gives us perspective. History gives us context. History can give us all sorts of things that can help us understand what is going on, what is happening, because we understand what helped us get here. So what I want to do is go all the way back to 1947, okay? In 1947, a church was incorporated right here in Kettering, Ohio. The church that was incorporated met in a house that used to sit on this property right here. In 1955, that church built a small building. That small building that they built now houses our kids' area, the tank, the cooler, and the kitchen. Those of you who've never ventured back into the kids' wing of the building and seen the tank and the cooler and the kitchen, that was the original church that was built here in 1955. There's actually a stone built into the building on the east side of the church where you can see where it says Church of God, 1955. So we're going way back, okay? 1955, they built that building. What is now the kitchen used to be bathrooms, okay? And there was a stage, and it was just a small church. And this group met there until 1977. In 1977, there was just a small remnant of the church left. The pastor had retired and moved on. They weren't sure what they were going to do next. There weren't very many of them. And they were contacted by a pastor from another church in the area who had just recently been let go from his church called Marshall Road First Church of God. And that church is actually not far from here. It's a mile and a half from us down the street. That pastor, along with a small group of people who used to be a part of that church, came to the group of people that was here. That remnant of people gifted the building to them, and the Kettering First Church of God was born, 1977. That group of people immediately made some changes. They turned the bathrooms into nursery space, and they added a hallway back here where our current bathrooms are. They added those bathrooms on in 1977, probably 78 in that time frame back in there. And then the building ended right past where the women's restroom is right now. Now, that group of people that was meeting here made some changes so that the house would work for their needs. Does that make sense? And I'm sure that there were probably some people here who were like, I don't really know how I feel about these changes. I kind of liked it the way it was before, but the house needed to work for the new group of people that was here. And so they made some changes. They began to grow pretty quickly. In the mid-'80s, they had outgrown their space, and they added this space right here onto their building, along with the lobby that is right outside of this space. So in 1986, this part of the building was born. And pretty much nothing in it, in this space, has been changed since. Now, y'all do some math, and I'll just let that sit there with you for a moment, okay? In 1996, 10 years later, the church had outgrown again the space that it was in, not necessarily for meeting space, but for educational space. And so there used to be a lawn and a court area on the other side of this wall right here, and the church decided to fill that in and put a flat roof over it so that they would have education space. There were classrooms added. There's a music room right off outside of this door that used to be an exit door. There are also 2 nurseries that were added on in that back space, again, to help meet the needs of the church as they had grown. And so the church functioned, did really well, and then 2005 came. And in 2005, the pastor who'd been here for 28 years retired. And the church began the search for a new pastor. They found a new pastor, and the pastoral transition proved how the best way I can say this is difficult. Okay? The church thought that they were ready for a change, but in reality, the change that they got wasn't the change that they were really looking for. And after just 18 months, they parted ways with the pastor that they had hired. A young, inexperienced pastor took his place, a guy who had a heart for change and a new direction in the church, and the church would begin a 10-year journey to change the culture and direction of the church. That journey would result in an 80% turnover in the congregation membership. Now, again, I'm going to ask you to do some math and just let that sit there, okay? So that young, inexperienced pastor was me, and Sheila Winfield sitting back here and Scott out there in the lobby, they can tell you that looking around the building, there aren't very many people still here. Melissa Longo sitting back there, who were here when I became the pastor in 2007. I'm not proud of that, okay? I'm just being realistic with you about it, okay? And you're probably wondering, why are you telling us this? Well, it matters, okay? So this turnover in membership cost the church an enormous amount in terms of financial and people resources. And during that time, there were a number of maintenance and update needs that just did not get done because the funds to do them were not available. And then COVID hit the scene in 2020, and things went from bad to worse, right? It got really, really hard. Those issues with maintenance and upkeep were just exacerbated, and needs just began piling up, and it was so difficult to manage because, let's be honest about it, the size and scope of this building became too much for the number of people who were expected to be able to maintain it. And look, that's just reality, okay? Right? Everybody with me? Now, in 2021, early 2021, Kettering Church received a phone call from a pastor of another church who was looking for a place to meet because they had lost their space. And so they were asking, hey, could we possibly rent your building? Now, the Kettering Church jumped at the opportunity, in part because we felt like we need to help this church out. This is what churches should do. But also in part because the rental income would be great to help us take care of some of the maintenance issues that we had, right? And so in early 2021, Discover Point Church began renting space here, and a relationship was born. A relationship that would eventually lead to a marriage of these two churches that complemented each other in amazing ways, but also brought something into the relationship that the other really, really needed. Kettering Church brought a debt-free facility, and Discover Point Church brought a fairly significant amount of seed money that was intended to help them secure a place of their own in which to meet. And so while the house here at Kettering Church was debt-free, it was not free from much-needed updates, right? And so that seed money that Discover Point Church brought into the relationship was far more than enough to take care of some of those updates and then leave us to wrestle with the question, where do we go from here? So, we have now been married for 5 months, right? Five Rivers Church is like 5 months old now. Yes. In those 5 months, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of what we have done. In order to keep our house warm and comfortable. Now, I have to say something before I go any further. I was talking over my sermon with my wife yesterday, and I was telling her about some of these things, and she added all these little reasons why we did this. I can't take credit for this. So I'm going to give credit where credit is due to Dawn over here. She always says, you don't give me credit for anything that I tell you. So, right? In order to keep our house warm, we replaced 5 HVAC units, okay? 5 HVAC units. That's a lot, isn't it, Ryan? Where's Josh? Is Josh in here too? Josh, he's in the back. Ryan and Josh did that. That's why I'm asking them. It was a lot. I know it was a lot of work. To keep the house safe, we recently updated and replaced our entry doors. They actually open and close as they're supposed to now. It's pretty amazing. No more pulled fire alarms and people breaking in the building, okay? In order for us to make sure that we are keeping our family all on the same page, we updated our projection system so it actually sometimes works. Now, this morning we had some issues. To make our house easy for guests to find, we replaced our front sign. To make room for our family to grow, we have updated and are looking at ways to improve our kids' area. To make better space for family time, we have added round tables and new chairs. that we can use to gather in circles instead of rows. To make room for guests in the future, we have removed, get this, I did not know this until I looked at the bill, over 2 tons, did you hear me say tons? 2 tons of trash was removed from this building that had accumulated over 20 years in the space. And that's all good, right? I mean, that's something to be happy about. Now, here's the reality, though. There is still stuff that has to be done, right? In order to keep our home dry, we have to replace a flat roof over our kids' area. We have the ball rolling on that. We don't know how much it's going to cost, but we do have the ball rolling. Hopefully, before too long, that will actually be done. To help us keep within our family budget, we're going to replace all of our interior and exterior lighting with LED lights to help us save money on energy costs. Because while LED is a little more expensive on the front end, it is so much cheaper to operate in the long run. To make sure we keep up with curb appeal, we're going to update some much-needed paint on the soffits and trim of the building and fix some of our soffits and gutters that are in need of repair. So we have some things yet to do, but church, here's what I want you to know. Those are all just maintenance issues. That's all just basic maintenance, stuff that just has to be done. That's not even about making the decision about how this house works for us as a family. And so now we face the question, what is next? Because just like every family who has to ask hard questions about how do we make our house work for our family, Five Rivers Church has to do the same thing. And here's the big question. This is in your notes today, so if you're following along, this question is in your notes because I want to make sure everybody hears it. The question that we have to wrestle with, the big question for this whole process is this. How do we need to modify this house to maximize our ability to engage in relational ministry efforts? Tracy spent a lot of time talking to you about relational ministry, not just in our first series on We Are Family, but also in our second series, and we're going to continue to talk about it in this series because it is central to the DNA of who we are as Five Rivers Church, because relationships are where discipleship happens, and that's what we're about. So we need to ask questions, right? Like this. Okay, so what needs to be done in order for this to happen? In order for this building to work for relational ministry, what needs to be done? How does the building need to be changed? What needs to be added? What needs to be taken away? What needs to be moved and relocated? What needs to happen in this facility for us to better, as a church, not as individuals, as a church, live, love, and lead like Jesus? To create environments where we're more likely to see a movement of God, which will result in disciples who make disciples groups and churches. That's the question that we have to ask. And here's what I need you to know. And this is the part of the sermon that is like, so far it's been like all like, oh yeah, that's all exciting. Well, here's the part where it gets a little bit harder. So just be ready, okay? The work is only beginning. Right? Some of you are like, oh, there's work that was done? Yeah. And it's only just getting started. Okay? There's a lot to do to make this building meet our family needs. Because what we're doing right now is we're evaluating what needs to happen. But guess what happens after we figure that out? Yeah, we actually have to do it. Right? Like, it sounds great. There's this team of people who's going to figure out all these answers, and we just get to sit by and be like, oh, that's great. Nope. We actually have to do it. And so here's the reality. We talked about each of us having a part to play, right? Oh, yeah. Each of us has a part and a role to play, and here's what it's going to cost all of us. Time, energy, and resources. We just have to be real about that. In order for us as a family to make this building work for our family needs, we're all going to have to invest some time, some energy, and some resources. And it's not going to be easy. And if we're all honest with each other, we all know that anything that's worth doing usually isn't easy, is it? Right? Those things that are most worth doing are rarely ever easy. And here's what I want you to know. This idea that we're talking to you about today is nothing new. There is nothing new in what I'm telling you right now. In fact, if you were to go to your Bible into the Old Testament, you would find examples of where this reality is like actually spelled out to us. One of those examples I'm going to read to you just a couple of verses from the book of Haggai this morning. Okay? Tiny, tiny book tucked away in the minor prophets section of the Bible. This particular book is written during the remnant period of Israelite history. So it's after the exile. The Israelites have been released from captivity. They've been sent back to their homeland. There's this small remnant of the people, and they're back where they belong. Okay? And here's what the Bible says in Haggai, chapter 1, verse 2. I'm going to read it to you. You can follow along with me. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Now, I want to stop there because there's a lot of speculation, if you look into the history of this, as to why the people say this. There is some speculation that maybe if you go back and count the 70 predicted years of captivity, that in some dating methods, the 70 years hasn't passed yet. In some dating methods, well, the period is way past. So some people would say, well, the time hadn't come because the 70 years of captivity hadn't been fulfilled. But then there's another speculation that maybe, just maybe, the Samaritans and some of the people who were in the area were opposed to the Israelites coming back and rebuilding the temple. And they just didn't want to deal with the political fallout of doing it. So we don't really know why the people are saying that the time has not yet come to rebuild the temple. All we know is that they're saying it. And what we do know, though, is how God responds to the issue. In verse 3, God says this, "Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai." And in verse 4, he says, "Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin?" Now again, we don't know exactly what paneled houses even means. We can speculate that this means that the people have been working to make their homes more comfortable. Whether there's exterior or interior paneling, we just don't know. What we do know is that this is something more than just having a house to live in. Y'all follow me? And so what God is saying here is not that you shouldn't have a house, but hey, you're living in paneled houses while my house is a ruin. Now, here's the thing. Here's what I need to make sure I explain to you today. Next week, we're going to deep dive into Haggai, okay? We're going to deep dive into this little book. It's very short, because I don't want to leave this here and have you all feeling like we're talking about something that we're not. Because this can sound like, oh, I know where this is going. And I don't want you to think that way, okay? So this week, I'm just leaving you with a little bit of a teaser for what we're going to talk about next week, okay? And what I want you to do this week is I want you to begin praying. You begin praying about what is next at Five Rivers Church. I want you as an individual, each of you, as I'm going to do, I want you to ask God to prepare your heart to be open to the role He's going to ask you to play in helping this church get to what is next. Are you all with me? See, here's what I want you to know. I'm not in any way saying that this building that we're talking about today, this house that we live in, is the equivalent of God's temple in the Old Testament, because it's not. It's not the same thing. And I don't want any of you to think that I'm trying to equate them. Again, next week we'll talk a lot more about that. But here's what is reality, though. This is the house that God has given us to use for His kingdom purposes. Are you with me? In the book of Haggai, God is talking to the people about His purposes and why they're neglecting His purposes. And what we want to do is make sure we're not, as a church family or as individuals, neglecting God's purposes. We have a responsibility to take seriously our task to carry out the work that God has given each of us to do. And I think this is one of the issues with the church and the church family, is that we've become consumers in the church, and we want to be able to come to church and then leave and come back next week and not have to do anything in between. We want to just be able to come and the church will be here and we'll be able to engage, but there may be things that each of us have to do in order to make this work. Those of you who have children at home who are old enough to do chores, how many of you expect them to do the chores that you've given them to do? And how do you feel when they don't do them? Not happy. I can't tell you how many times Dawn and I come down from our bedroom in the mornings to a kitchen full of dirty dishes. And somehow, miraculously, the dishwasher is empty. Right? And it's like, how many times have we asked you just to put the dishes in the dishwasher? It doesn't seem that hard, right? How hard is this really? Is it hard, folks? I sometimes wonder what God thinks when he looks down and says, I just don't understand. How hard is this really? And here's what I think happens with our kids. You know what happens? They're so busy on social media, or they're so busy doing X, Y, or Z, whatever it is they're doing, they don't have time for chores. Oh, I know some of you are like, what are you trying to say? Next week, folks, remember, next week. Okay. I know, like nobody's going to come next week. I should have left that part out. But seriously, church, hear me when I say, we now stand ready as a church to take on the task of what comes next. And this is going to be hard. It's going to be a hard process. So I don't want any of you to be like blindsided by how difficult it might become. And so what am I asking you to do this week? Do y'all remember what I'm asking you to do? It's still up on the screen, right? I want you to begin praying about to prepare your heart for what God is going to ask you to do to help us as a church get to what is next. Would you pray with me as we close? Lord, today we are thankful for your word. We're thankful for stories that you tell us about things that happened thousands of years ago, but that have relevance and bearing onto things that we do right here and right now. When we look back at history, the things that we have to learn about what you want us to do and the things that you want us to consider to be important, that we can look back and see how much you care about your people going about your work for your kingdom purposes. And God, I pray for each person who's here, whether they're listening along today online or they're in the space, that each of us would begin praying about what you would have us to do. What role do you have for us to play? And soften our hearts to be willing to engage in the task that you put before us. Give us wisdom as we seek to find the best way to use this building, this house that you have given us, to meet our needs as a family. God, we love you, we praise you, we ask all of these things in your name today. Amen. Thank you for being here. I hope you'll come back next week. Please come back next week as we deep dive into Haggai. God bless you guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.